For centuries, women have been fighting for better treatment, rights, and equality in a world that is dominated by men. In the midst of World War II, women were obligated to take on jobs and provide for their children since the men had left to war and could not continue with their manly responsibilities. Therefore, they have begun to organize the famously known women's liberation movement.
The first signs of women's independence and movement came about in the early 1960s. This new feminism rejected all limits to equality of women's rights and showed that equality in daily life cannot be obtained through simple legal, political, or institutional modifications. They showed no tolerance and were fed up with the inequality between men and women and the men-dominated culture. In the late 1960s, women had discovered that, quote-unquote, sisterhood is powerful, as well as women unity. From Vancouver to Halifax, women started developing their own groups. In 1968, the Vancouver Women's Movement, so to say, was made and published the Pedestal from 1969 to 1973. Another movement that was discovered in 1969 was the Montreal Women's Liberation Movement. In 1970, Quebec revealed the Feminist Manifesto, and the Centre des Femmes edited the first French-language radical feminist periodical, Québécois Début, from 1971 to 1975. These groups have provided support, help, and shelter for battered women.
There have been many points in history that led to women's movement. However, we will touch upon the basic ones that have started since World War II. The three main ones are as follows: the development of effective birth control methods, invention of labor-saving devices for the home, and the advent of World War II. The invention of birth control was a major breakthrough in enabling women to pursue their interests. They were free from the responsibility of endless cycle of having children, one after another. The fact that they had the choice of whether to have children or not, or lay off childbearing to a later point, gave women the time to go after education, work, and career. Consequently, it gave them the freedom to get out of the home.
The second event that had caused the women's movement was the development of merchandise labor-saving devices or appliances for the home. With these inventions, women had twice the amount of free time to do other things. For example, about 50 years ago, an average housewife would spend an average of 12 to 15 hours per day doing housework and chores. Therefore, they would find different things to do with their time, such as different hobbies, pursuing interests, education, school, and work. Time-saving inventions such as vacuum, dishwashers, clothes washers, etc. was one of the causes for a women's movement for it to make it easier for women to occupy their time with something other than housework. The third and possibly the most important cause for women's movement was World War II. During the war, almost all men had left their homes to go overseas and fight and serve in the military. Therefore, the people that could fulfill the labor force, keep the country moving, and feed children were women. They had replaced men in almost all types of jobs, from factory jobs to taking over their husbands' businesses and so on. For almost 5 years, women had worked in a labor force and took care of their housework and children. This was a major breakthrough for North American women, for they felt as they were more responsible for something way more than just being housewives and obeying their husbands. They felt as though they had power, in which fact they did. Once the men came back from work, the women had to go back to their regular lives, which they were reluctant to do so.
Women have come a long way since the women's movement had just begun. However, there are still many cases where women are not treated 100% equal to men. The future and most definitely current problem with women's liberation that North America should focus on is complete equality amongst men and women in the workplace along with equal pay. Politically speaking, women should be in charge of decisions regarding their bodies, such as abortion. It is only fair that women themselves decide and vote on these matters because it is their body and their choice. The social theory that applies to the women's movement is the conflict theory of change by Marx. This change is concerned in inequities that plague societies. Groups with opposing interests are in conflict. Although this theory was originally a conflict between the rich and the poor, it is still about power. In this case, women were the minorities and they fought for power and equality rights. In the women's movement, those with authority were men and they were in the command class. Those in the obey class were women. Therefore, men had all the power whereas women had little to no power.